Brielle Adams walked into the gleaming lobby of her own 40-story corporate tower, dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie after flying back from a month-long business trip to Singapore. The marble floors echoed with her footsteps as she approached the reception desk, exhausted but eager to check on her company's quarterly preparations. What happened next would expose a shocking truth about the very people she trusted to represent her empire, and by noon that day, the entire front desk staff would be clearing out their lockers. The security footage of where unfolded would become legendary within corporate circles. But the real story starts with a simple misunderstanding that revealed something much deeper. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across downtown Chicago as Brielle Adams stepped out of her rideshare vehicle, pulling her baseball cap lower over her eyes. After 36 hours of international travel, she looked nothing like the polished executive who graced Forbes covers and commanded boardrooms across 3 continents. Her designer jeans were wrinkled from the flight, her Northwestern University hoodie was faded from years of wear, and her sneakers had seen better days. She carried only a small backpack, having left her luggage at her penthouse apartment for a quick shower and change before heading to the office. The Adams Group International Tower rose before her like a monolith of glass and steel, its 40 floors catching the morning light and reflecting it back onto the bustling street below. Brielle paused for a moment, feeling that familiar surge of pride mixed with responsibility that always hit her when she saw her life's work stretching toward the sky. She had built this empire from nothing, starting with a small consulting firm in her garage 12 years ago, and now it employed over 15,000 people worldwide. As she approached the main entrance, Brielle noticed the large construction banner hanging across the building's facade, obscuring the gold lettering that normally announced Adams Group International to the world. The building was undergoing exterior renovations, and she had approved the temporary covering during her trip to Singapore. What she didn't know was that this banner would play a crucial role in the events about to unfold. The lobby doors whispered open with their familiar pneumatic hiss, and Brielle stepped into the soaring atrium that had cost her company $3 million to design. Imported Italian marble covered the floors in intricate patterns, while a massive crystal chandelier hung suspended from the vaulted ceiling. Water cascaded down a living wall of tropical plants, creating a gentle white noise that was supposed to promote calm and productivity. Despite the early hour, the space buzzed with activity as employees streamed toward the elevator banks, their heels clicking against the polished stone. Brielle made her way toward the reception desk, where 3 women in crisp navy blazers sat behind a curved marble counter. She recognized none of them, which wasn't entirely surprising given the company's size and her month-long absence. The HR department handled most hiring decisions for support staff, and Brielle trusted her team to maintain the company's standards of professionalism and customer service. The woman closest to her, a blonde in her early 30s with perfectly styled hair and manicured nails, looked up from her computer screen with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her nameplate read, Madison Porter, and she wore the kind of confident expression that suggested she took her gatekeeping role very seriously. "Good morning," Madison said, her tone polite but unmistakably dismissive as she took in Brielle's casual appearance. "How can I help you today?" "I need to get upstairs to the executive floors," Brielle said simply, adjusting her backpack strap. She was too tired for small talk and assumed this would be a quick interaction. Madison's smile grew more strained. "I'm sorry, but we don't allow visitors on the upper floors without appointments. Are you here for a tour? We schedule those on weekends." Brielle blinked, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me?" "Building tours are available on Saturdays at 10 and 2, Madison repeated slowly, as if speaking to someone who might not understand English well. "You'll need to call our main number to schedule. The tours cover floors 1 through 5 only." A second receptionist, an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, leaned over to whisper something in Madison's ear. Brielle caught fragments. "Probably another one of those. And security should handle." "Ma'am," Madison continued, her voice taking on a more authoritative tone, "I'm going to have to ask you to step back from the desk. This is a private corporate building, not a public space." Brielle felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she had experienced countless times throughout her career, when people made assumptions about her based on her appearance. She had faced this kind of treatment in boardrooms, at conferences, and even at her own company events when she was mistaken for catering staff or an assistant. But never, in her wildest imagination, had she expected to encounter it in her own lobby. "I work here," Brielle said calmly, though her jaw was beginning to clench. "I need to access the 38th floor." Madison let out a small laugh that was anything but amused. "Ma'am, I've worked here for 6 months, and I know every executive in this building. You are not one of them." She gestured toward Brielle's outfit with barely concealed disdain. "Our executives don't show up in hoodies and sneakers." The third receptionist, a younger woman who had been watching the exchange with growing discomfort, started to say something, but Madison cut her off with a sharp look. "Look," Madison continued, standing up from her chair to establish her authority. "I don't know what kind of game you're trying to play here, but this is a Fortune 500 company. Not some startup where people dress like they're going to the gym. Security cameras record everything in this lobby, so I suggest you leave before I have to call building security." Brielle took a deep breath, counting to 10 in her head. She had learned long ago that losing her temper in situations like this only made things worse. People were already looking for reasons to dismiss her, and an angry outburst would just confirm their biases. "Could you please check your employee directory?" Brielle asked, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "Look up Brielle Adams." Madison rolled her eyes dramatically. "Ma'am, Brielle Adams is the CEO of this company. She's a sophisticated, professional woman who dresses appropriately and doesn't show up unannounced demanding access to restricted floors." She paused, letting her gaze travel from Brielle's sneakers to her baseball cap. "You are clearly not Brielle Adams." The absurdity of the situation was almost overwhelming. Brielle stood in her own lobby, in the building that bore her name, being told by her own employee that she wasn't who she said she was. She reached into her backpack for her wallet, thinking she could show her corporate ID card, but then stopped. Why should she have to prove her identity to her own staff? "I understand there might be some confusion," Brielle said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used in board meetings. "But I am Brielle Adams. I am the CEO of this company, and I am going upstairs to my office. Now." Madison's face flushed red with indignation. "Security," she called out, pressing a button on her desk phone. "We have a situation in the main lobby." Within 30 seconds, 2 uniformed security guards appeared from their station near the elevators. Brielle recognized them both, Rodriguez and Chen, men she had personally thanked during the company holiday party just 4 months earlier. But they showed no signs of recognition as they approached, their hands resting casually on their radios. "What seems to be the problem here?" Rodriguez asked, looking between Madison and Brielle. "This woman is claiming to be CEO Brielle Adams," Madison said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "She's demanding access to the executive floors and becoming belligerent when I explained our security policies." Rodriguez studied Brielle's face for a moment, and she saw a flicker of something, uncertainty perhaps, cross his features. But Madison's confident assertions seemed to override any doubts he might have had. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the building," Rodriguez said, his tone professional but firm. "If you'd like to schedule a legitimate appointment, you can call during business hours." The lobby had grown quieter as other employees and visitors began to notice the commotion. Brielle felt dozens of eyes on her, watching as she was publicly humiliated in her own building. Some people were discreetly taking out their phones, no doubt recording video that would end up on social media within hours. "This is incredible," Brielle said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Absolutely incredible." "Ma'am, you need to calm down," Chen said, stepping closer. "We don't want to have to escort you out, but we will if necessary." Brielle looked around the lobby one more time, taking in the faces of her employees who were treating her like a threat. She saw fear in some eyes, curiosity in others, but not a single person showed any sign of recognition. It was as if she had become invisible in her own company. "Fine," Brielle said quietly. "I'll leave." She turned and walked toward the main entrance, her sneakers squeaking slightly against the marble floor. Behind her, she could hear Madison talking to the security guards in hushed tones, probably explaining how she had handled the situation professionally and protected the company from potential security threats. As Brielle pushed through the glass doors and emerged onto the sidewalk, she felt a mixture of hurt, anger, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Disappointment, perhaps, or maybe a deeper sadness about what this incident revealed about her company's culture. She walked to a coffee shop across the street and ordered a double espresso, needing the caffeine to help her think clearly. As she sat by the window, looking back at her building, Brielle pulled out her phone and made a call. "Marcus, it's Brielle," she said when her head of facilities management answered. "I need you to remove the construction banner from the building facade immediately." "But boss, the renovation isn't scheduled to finish until next week," Marcus replied, confusion evident in his voice. "The exterior work is still ongoing." "I don't care about the schedule," Brielle said firmly. "I want that banner down in the next 10 minutes. And Marcus, make sure everyone in the lobby can see the building's name when it's revealed." "Okay, boss. Is everything all right? You sound upset." "You sound upset." Brielle watched as a maintenance crew began setting up equipment on the sidewalk across from her building. "Everything's about to be just fine, Marcus. Trust me on this one." As she ended the call, Brielle's phone immediately rang again. This time, it was Jennifer Walsh, her executive assistant, and one of the few people who knew about her early return from Singapore. "Brielle. Thank God," Jennifer said breathlessly. "I just got word that security escorted someone out of the main lobby who was claiming to be you. I tried to tell them it might actually be you, but Madison Porter insisted it was impossible because you were still overseas. Where are you?" "I'm having coffee across the street, watching my own building," Brielle said dryly. "And yes, I was the person they escorted out." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh no. Oh, Brielle, I am so sorry. This is unacceptable. I'm coming down right now to straighten this out." "No," Brielle said firmly. "Don't say anything to anyone yet. I want to see how this plays out first." Through the coffee shop window, Brielle watched as Marcus and his crew began the process of removing the large banner that had concealed her building's identity. The work required careful coordination, with crews positioned at multiple points along the facade to ensure the heavy material didn't damage the exterior or fall onto the busy sidewalk below. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Madison Porter was feeling rather pleased with herself. She had successfully protected the company from what she was convinced was either a con artist or someone with mental health issues. In her mind, she had demonstrated exactly the kind of vigilance and professionalism that Adams Group International expected from its frontline staff. "I handled that really well, don't you think?" Madison said to her colleagues, settling back into her chair with satisfaction. "Can you imagine if I had just let some random person waltz up to the executive floors? The real CEO would have my head." The younger receptionist, Sarah Kim, still looked uncomfortable. "But what if she really was?" "Sarah, please," Madison interrupted. "Brielle Adams is sophisticated, professional, probably traveling with an entourage and security detail. She doesn't show up alone in gym clothes making demands. Use some common sense." Outside, the banner removal was progressing quickly. Marcus had mobilized a full crew, and they were working with the efficiency that came from years of maintaining one of Chicago's premier office buildings. The first section of the banner began to peel away, revealing the gleaming gold letters underneath. A few pedestrians on the sidewalk began to stop and watch, curious about the unexpected activity. Some pointed up at the building, and a small crowd began to gather as more of the lettering became visible. In the coffee shop, Brielle sipped her espresso and waited. She had learned patience over the years, understanding that sometimes the most powerful response was simply to let the truth reveal itself. She thought about all the time she had been underestimated, dismissed, or overlooked because people couldn't reconcile her appearance with their expectations of success and authority. When she was building her first company, investors had assumed she was the assistant and directed their questions to her male business partner. At industry conferences, people handed her their coats, assuming she was there to check them rather than deliver the keynote address. Even after years of success and recognition, She still encountered people who seemed genuinely surprised that a young black woman could run a multi-billion-dollar corporation. But this incident was different. This wasn't strangers making assumptions based on prejudice and stereotypes. These were her own employees, people who worked for the company she had built from nothing, treating her as if she were a threat to be neutralized rather than the person who signed their paychecks. The banner continued to come down, and now half of the building's name was visible. Adams Group. The crowd on the sidewalk was growing larger, and several people were taking photos with their phones. Inside the lobby, Sarah Kim was the first to notice the activity outside. She glanced through the floor-to-ceiling windows and saw people gathering on the sidewalk, all looking up at something on the building's facade. "What's going on out there?" she asked, standing up from her desk to get a better view. Madison barely looked up from her computer. "Probably just construction. They've been working on the exterior for weeks." But Sarah's curiosity was piqued. She walked closer to the windows, pressing her face against the glass to see what was happening above. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. "Madison," she said quietly, her voice tight with anxiety. "I think you need to see this." "What?" Madison said impatiently, finally looking up from her screen. "The banner is coming down," Sarah whispered. "And I can see the building's name." Madison frowned, enjoying Sarah at the window. As she looked up at the facade, her confident expression began to crumble. The gold letters were now fully visible. Adams Group International. "So what?" Madison said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "It's just the regular building signage." "Madison," Sarah said slowly. "The woman who was here earlier, she said her name was Brielle Adams." The third receptionist, Carol Martinez, had overheard the conversation and came over to join them. "What are you two looking at?" "The banner's coming down," Sarah explained, pointing upward. "And that woman from earlier said she was Brielle Adams. Like, Adams Group International." Carol's eyes widened as the implications began to sink in. "You don't think—" "No way," Madison said firmly, but doubt was creeping into her voice. That woman was not CEO material. She was dressed like a college student. But even as she said it, Madison felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. She had been so certain, so confident in her assessment. But what if she had been wrong? What if the woman in the hoodie and sneakers really was Brielle Adams? Outside, the banner removal was nearly complete. The full name of the company now blazed in golden letters across the building's facade. Adams Group International. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown to nearly 50 people, all craning their necks to look up at the dramatic reveal. In the coffee shop, Brielle finished her espresso and checked her phone. She had 17 missed calls from various executives, all of whom had apparently heard about the incident in the lobby. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, especially when it involved potential security breaches and mistaken identity. She decided it was time to make her grand entrance. Standing up from her table, Brielle walked back across the street toward her building. The crowd on the sidewalk parted slightly as she approached, though none of them recognized her as the person the banner removal was ultimately meant to vindicate. As she approached the main entrance, Brielle could see through the glass doors that the three receptionists were huddled together, having what appeared to be an intense conversation. Madison was gesticulating wildly, while Sarah and Carol looked increasingly distressed. Brielle paused just outside the doors, taking a moment to compose herself. She had every right to be angry, to storm in and demand explanations and apologies. But she had learned that true power often lay in restraint, in maintaining dignity, even when others had failed to show her the same courtesy. She pushed through the doors and walked directly to the reception desk. The three women looked up simultaneously, and Brielle watched as recognition and horror dawned on their faces in real time. "Good morning," Brielle said calmly, using the same tone she had used an hour earlier. "I believe we were having a conversation about accessing the executive floors." Madison's face had gone completely white. She opened her mouth several times, but no words came out. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the desk, and Brielle could see sweat beginning to form on her forehead despite the building's efficient air conditioning. I, Madison stammered, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Ms. Adams," Sarah interrupted, stepping forward with tears in her eyes. "I am so incredibly sorry. I tried to suggest that maybe we should check, but—" "But you were overruled," Brielle finished gently. She could see that Sarah was genuinely remorseful, unlike Madison, who still seemed to be processing the magnitude of her mistake. Carol, the oldest of the three, had been working in corporate environments long enough to understand the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Adams, we have no excuse for what happened. We failed in our duty to represent your company professionally, and we treated you with disrespect. We understand if you want our immediate resignations." Brielle looked at each of them in turn, studying their faces and trying to gauge their sincerity. She had always believed that people deserved second chances, but this incident had revealed something deeply troubling about the culture of her own organization. "Tell me something," Brielle said, leaning against the reception desk. "What exactly made you so certain that I couldn't be who I said I was?" Madison finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. You weren't dressed like an executive, and you came alone, without security or assistance or—" "So, my clothing determined my credibility?" Brielle asked. "The fact that I was wearing jeans and sneakers meant I couldn't possibly be the CEO of this company?" "It wasn't just that," Madison said desperately. "It was— you didn't look like—" She stopped herself, realizing that she was about to say something that would make an already terrible situation exponentially worse. "Didn't look like what, Madison?" Brielle asked quietly. "Didn't look like your idea of what a CEO should look like?" The lobby had grown quiet again, as other employees and visitors sensed the tension at the reception desk. Word was spreading quickly through the building that something significant was happening, and people were beginning to gather at a respectful distance to witness the aftermath of what would surely become company legend. Madison's silence spoke volumes. Brielle could see the truth written across her face, the uncomfortable reality that her assumptions had been based on more than just clothing and presentation. They had been rooted in deeper biases about who belonged in positions of power and authority. "Here's what's going to happen," Brielle said, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of running board meetings and managing crises. "Madison, you're going to clean out your desk and be out of this building within the hour. Your employment with Adams Group International is terminated immediately." Madison's legs gave out, and she sank back into her chair. "Please, Ms. Adams, I have a mortgage, student loans. I can't lose this job. It was just a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Brielle said firmly. "It was a failure of judgment, professionalism, and basic human decency. You didn't just refuse to help me. You called security to have me removed from my own building. You treated me like a criminal because I didn't fit your narrow definition of what success looks like." She turned to Sarah, whose face was streaked with tears. "Sarah, you showed some awareness that something wasn't right, but you didn't speak up when it mattered. You're going to receive a formal reprimand in your personnel file, and you'll attend sensitivity and bias training within the next 30 days. "Ah." Sarah nodded eagerly. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for giving me another chance. I promise this will never happen again." Finally, Brielle looked at Carol. "You've been the most honest about the situation and seem to understand the seriousness of what occurred. You'll also attend the training, but there will be no formal disciplinary action on your record." As if on cue, Jennifer Walsh appeared at Brielle's side, having finally made her way down from the executive floors. Her usually composed demeanor was showing cracks of stress and embarrassment. "Brielle, I've been trying to reach you," Jennifer said, then lowered her voice. "Security has the entire incident on video. I've already spoken with HR about conducting a full review of our reception and security protocols." "Good," Brielle said. "And, Jennifer? I want a company-wide memo sent out this afternoon about professional conduct and unconscious bias. Everyone in this organization needs assurai to understand that respect and professionalism aren't determined by someone's appearance or their assumptions about who belongs where." End quote. Madison was now crying openly, gathering her few personal items from the reception desk. "Ms. Adams, please reconsider. I've learned my lesson. I swear this will never happen again." Brielle felt a flicker of sympathy for the younger woman, but she knew that some lessons could only be learned through consequences. "Madison, I hope you have learned something from this experience. But actions have consequences. And the way you treated me today was completely unacceptable. No employee should ever feel comfortable treating anyone with that level of disrespect, regardless of who they think they are." End quote. As Madison walked toward the elevators with a small box of her belongings, other employees throughout the lobby watched in stunned silence. The story would spread through the company within hours, becoming a cautionary tale about assumptions, prejudice, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Rodriguez and Chen, the security guards who had been called to escort Brielle out earlier, approached hesitantly. Their faces showed a mixture of embarrassment and concern about their own job security. "Ms. Adams," Rodriguez said carefully, "we owe you a sincere apology. We should have recognized you, and we certainly should have questioned the receptionist's assessment before taking action." Brielle studied both men, remembering their faces from company events and their years of dedicated service to the organization. "Rodriguez, Chen, I understand that you are responding to what you believed was a legitimate security concern, but I want you both to remember that good security isn't just about following orders. It's about using good judgment and treating all people with respect, even when you're asking them to leave." Both men nodded solemnly. "It won't happen again, ma'am," Chen promised. "See that it doesn't," Brielle said. "And in the future, if there's any question about someone's identity, you take the time to verify, rather than making assumptions." As the immediate crisis began to settle, Brielle found herself reflecting on the broader implications of what had occurred. This wasn't just about one prejudiced receptionist or a case of mistaken identity. It was a symptom of larger issues within her organization and society as a whole. She thought about all the other Black women, young professionals, and people from diverse backgrounds who might face similar treatment in corporate environments. How many talented individuals were being dismissed, overlooked, or disrespected because they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of success? "Jennifer," Brielle said, "I want to schedule a series of town hall meetings with employees at all levels. We need to have honest conversations about inclusion, bias, and what it really means to create a welcoming workplace." "I'll start setting those up immediately," Jennifer replied. "And Brielle, I'm truly sorry this happened. It reflects poorly on all of us in leadership positions." Brielle nodded, appreciating her assistant's acknowledgement of collective responsibility. "We all have work to do, Jennifer." This incident just made it clear how much work. As they walked toward the elevator bank, Brielle noticed that the lobby was beginning to return to its normal rhythm. Employees were going about their business, though she caught several of them stealing glances in her direction. Some looked embarrassed, others curious, and a few offered respectful nods of acknowledgement. The elevator doors opened, and Brielle stepped inside, finally heading to her office on the 38th floor. As the car rose smoothly upward, she looked out through the glass walls at the city spreading below her. Chicago had been her home for over a decade, the place where she had built her dreams into reality. But today's experience reminded her that even in her own house, she could still be made to feel like an outsider. When the elevator opened onto the executive floor, Brielle was greeted by familiar faces and genuine smiles. These were people who knew her, who had worked closely with her for years, and who understood her vision for the company. The contrast with her reception downstairs was stark and telling. "Welcome back, boss," Marcus called out from down the hallway. "I got that banner down fast like you asked. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine now, Marcus. Thank you for taking care of that so quickly." Brielle's corner office occupied the entire southeast corner of the 38th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. Her desk was a sleek piece of modern design, crafted from sustainable materials and positioned to take advantage of the natural light. Awards, photos from company milestones, and personal mementos filled the built-in shelves, creating a space that was both professional and welcoming. As she settled into her chair, Brielle's phone began ringing almost immediately. The first call was from David Park, her chief operating officer, who had heard about the lobby incident through the company's informal communication network. "Brielle, what the hell happened downstairs?" David asked without preamble. "I'm hearing crazy stories about reception not recognizing you." "The stories are probably true," Brielle said, booting up her computer and scanning through the dozens of emails that had accumulated during her flight. Madison Porter apparently decided I wasn't executive material based on my outfit and general appearance. Jesus, David muttered. What are we going to do about this? We're going to learn from it, Brielle said firmly. This is an opportunity to examine our hiring practices, our training programs, and our company culture. We clearly have some blind spots that need to be addressed. The next few hours passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategic planning sessions. News of the incident had spread beyond the company, with several business journalists reaching out for comment about the mistaken identity story that was beginning to circulate on social media. Brielle decided to get ahead of the narrative by drafting a company-wide day email that acknowledged what had happened while using it as a teachable moment. She spent considerable time crafting the message, wanting to strike the right balance between accountability and forward-looking leadership. To all Adams Group International employees, she began. This morning, I experienced firsthand what it feels like to be judged and dismissed based on appearances and assumptions rather than character and credentials. While this was personally difficult, it has provided our organization with an invaluable opportunity to examine our practices and recommit to our values of inclusion, respect, and professional excellence. The email went on to outline specific steps the company would take, including enhanced bias training, revised hiring, and customer service protocols, and regular listening sessions where employees could share their experiences and suggestions for improvement. By mid-afternoon, responses to Brielle's email were flooding in from employees throughout the organization. Many expressed embarrassment about the morning's events and support for the proposed changes. Others shared their own experiences with bias and discrimination, creating an unexpected but welcome dialogue about issues that had previously been discussed only in private conversations. One email particularly caught Brielle's attention. It was from Marcus Washington, a junior BA analyst in the finance department, who wrote, Ms. Adams, thank you for turning this difficult experience into an opportunity for all of us to grow. As one of the few black employees in my department, I've sometimes felt like I had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously. Your leadership gives me hope that we can create a workplace where everyone's contributions are valued, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Messages like Marcus's reminded Brielle why the morning's humiliation had been worth enduring. If her experience could help create positive change for other employees, then perhaps some good could come from the pain and embarrassment she had felt. As the afternoon wore on, Brielle found herself thinking about Madison Porter. Despite her anger over the woman's behavior, she couldn't help but wonder about the factors that had shaped Madison's assumptions and responses. Had she been taught, either explicitly or implicitly, that successful people looked and acted a certain way? Had her previous work environments reinforced these biases? Brielle made a mental note to have HR conduct exit interviews with all departing employees, not just to understand why people left, but to learn what their experiences revealed about the company's culture and blind spots. Around 4 o'clock, Jennifer knocked on Brielle's office door. There's someone here to see you, she said. Sarah Kim, for reception. She asked if she could speak with you privately. Brielle looked up from her laptop, curious about what the young receptionist might want to say. Send her in. Sarah entered the office nervously, clearly awed by the elegant space and panoramic views. She was still wearing her navy blazer, but her earlier composure had been replaced by obvious anxiety and remorse. Ms. Adams, thank you for agreeing to see me, Sarah began, standing stiffly near the door. I wanted to apologize again for this morning and to tell you something that I think you should know. Please, sit down, Brielle said, gesturing to one of the comfortable chairs arranged near her desk. What did you want to tell me? Sarah perched on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It's about Madison. I don't want to make excuses for what happened, but I think there's more to the story than you might realize. Brielle leaned back in her chair, intrigued. I'm listening. Madison has been struggling lately, Sarah said quietly. Her husband lost his job 3 months ago, and they've been having financial problems. She's been working extra shifts and taking on additional responsibilities to try to make ends meet. I think the stress has been affecting her judgment. That's unfortunate, Brielle said. "But it doesn't excuse treating people with disrespect." "No, you're absolutely right," Sarah agreed quickly. "But there's something else. Madison told me last week that she was worried about job security because she heard rumors about reception being outsourced to a professional service company. I think she was trying so hard to prove that she was protecting the company that she went too far." This was new information that put Madison's behavior in a slightly different context. Brielle had indeed been considering outsourcing some administrative functions, including reception, as part of a broader cost-cutting initiative. If Madison had heard these rumors, her aggressive gatekeeping might have been motivated by desperation rather than just prejudice. Sauce. "Sarah, I appreciate you sharing this with me," Brielle said thoughtfully. "It doesn't change what happened this morning, but it does help me understand the full picture." "There's one more thing," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "After you left this morning, Madison said something about how people like that were always trying to scam their way into buildings like this. She said she had dealt with similar situations at her previous job." Brielle felt her jaw tighten. "People like what, Sarah?" Sarah's discomfort was obvious, but she pressed on. I think she was making assumptions based on your race, Ms. Adams. And when I suggested that maybe we should double-check your identity, she said I was being naive, and that I needed to learn to read people better." This revelation confirmed what Brielle had suspected, but hoped wasn't true. Madison's behavior hadn't just been about clothing or professional presentation, it had been rooted in racial bias and stereotyping. "Thank you for telling me this, Sarah," Brielle said. "I know it wasn't easy, and I appreciate your honesty." "I should have spoken up more forcefully this morning," Sarah said, tears returning to her eyes. "I knew something felt wrong, but I let Madison intimidate me into staying quiet. I'm ashamed of myself. The important thing is that you recognize what happened and you're committed to doing better in the future," Brielle said. Gently. "We all make mistakes, Sarah. What matters is what we learn from them." After Sarah left, Brielle sat alone in her office, processing everything she had learned. The incident was more complex than she had initially realized, involving not just individual prejudice, but also economic anxiety, workplace insecurity, and systemic issues that extended far beyond her company's walls. She picked up her phone and called her head of human resources, Patricia Williams, who had been with the company for 8 years and had helped build many of their current policies and procedures. "Patricia, it's Brielle. I need to schedule a meeting with you first thing tomorrow morning. We need to conduct a comprehensive review of our hiring, training, and workplace culture practices." "Of course," Patricia replied, concern evident in her voice. "I've already started pulling together some preliminary data based on what happened this morning. Brielle, I have to ask, are you considering legal action? What Madison did could certainly be construed as discriminatory behavior." Brielle had considered this option but ultimately decided against it. "No, Patricia. Legal action would just create a media circus and distract from the real work we need to do. I want to focus on making sure this never happens again, not on punishment for its own sake." "I understand," Patricia said. "I'll have a full report ready for you by tomorrow morning, including recommendations for immediate changes and long-term initiatives." As evening approached, Brielle finally began to feel the exhaustion from her long journey and emotionally draining day. She gathered her things and prepared to leave the office, but as she waited for the elevator, she decided to make one final stop. The reception desk area was much quieter now, with only Carol Martinez remaining to handle the evening shift. The young woman looked up nervously as Brielle approached, clearly still processing the day's events. "Ms. Adams," Carol said, standing up respectfully. "Is there anything I can help you with?" "I wanted to check in with you, Carol," Brielle said, leaning against the marble counter. "Today was difficult for everyone involved. How are you holding up?" Carol's eyes filled with tears, but she composed herself quickly. "I keep thinking about how I could have handled things differently. I've been working in reception roles for 15 years, and I pride myself on treating everyone with respect and professionalism. Today I failed to live up to my own standards." "What would you have done differently?" Brielle asked, genuinely curious about Carol's perspective. "I should have insisted that we verify your identity through proper channels," Carol said without hesitation. Even if Madison was convinced you weren't who you said you were, I should have suggested calling your assistant or checking the employee directory. I let workplace dynamics override my better judgment. Brielle nodded, impressed by Carol's thoughtful analysis. That's exactly the kind of critical thinking we need more of in this organization. You recognized that something wasn't right, but you didn't act on that instinct. Why do you think that happened? Carol considered the question carefully. Honestly, Madison was very confident and assertive, and she had been here longer than Sarah and me. In reception work, you often have to make quick decisions about who to trust and who might be trying to deceive you. When a colleague with more experience tells you someone is a potential threat, you tend to defer to their judgment. But that's exactly when independent thinking becomes most important, Brielle said. Groupthink and deference to authority can lead to serious mistakes, as we saw today. You're absolutely right, Carol agreed. I promise you, Ms. Adams, if anything like this ever happens again, I'll trust my own instincts and insist on proper verification procedures. As Brielle finally left the building and stepped onto the sidewalk, she noticed that a small crowd of people was still gathered outside, looking up at the now fully visible company name on the building's facade. Some were taking selfies with the golden letters in the background, while others were engaged in animated conversations about what they had witnessed earlier. A young black woman, probably in her early 20s, approached Brielle hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Brielle Adams, the CEO?" "I am," Brielle confirmed, wondering what this stranger might want. "I saw what happened this morning," the woman said, her voice filled with emotion. "I was walking by when they were escorting you out, and then I stayed to watch when they took down the banner. I just wanted to say thank you." "Thank you for what?" Brielle asked, puzzled. "For handling it with such dignity," the woman explained. "I'm a business student at Northwestern, and I've read about your company in my classes. Seeing how you dealt with that situation, it gives me hope that I can face whatever challenges come my way in my career. You showed that success isn't about how people perceive you, it's about who you really are and what you've accomplished." The encounter reminded Brielle that her experience that morning had implications far beyond her own company. As a visible African-American woman in corporate leadership, her actions and responses were being watched and interpreted by others who might face similar challenges. "What's your name?" Brielle asked the young woman. "Angela Rivers," she replied. "I'm majoring in business administration with a focus on entrepreneurship." "Angela, let me give you some advice," Brielle said, pulling out one of her business cards. "You're going to face people who underestimate you, who question your qualifications, and who make assumptions about what you can and can't achieve. Don't let their limitations become yours. Stay focused on your goals. Surround yourself with people who believe in your potential, and never let anyone else's prejudices define your worth." Angela took the business card with reverence, as if she were receiving a sacred artifact. Would it be possible to schedule an informational interview sometime? I'd love to learn more about your path to success. Call my office next week, Brielle said with a smile. We'll set something up. As Brielle walked toward her car, she reflected on the unexpected ways the day had unfolded. What had started as a humiliating experience had evolved into an opportunity for growth, learning, and positive change. She thought about Madison Porter, who was probably at home trying to explain to her husband why she had lost her job. Despite her anger over the woman's behavior, Brielle felt a twinge of sympathy for the financial stress and fear that had contributed to her poor judgment. She made a mental note to have Jennifer look into whether the company had any freelance or contract opportunities that might be appropriate for someone with Madison's skills, assuming she was genuinely committed to learning from her mistakes. Brielle believed in second chances, even for people who had wronged her personally. The drive home through Chicago's evening traffic gave Brielle time to process the emotional roller coaster of the day. She thought about all the times throughout her career when she had been the only black person in the room, the only woman at the table, or the youngest executive in the meeting. Each of those situations had required her to prove herself repeatedly, to work harder than her peers, and to maintain composure in the face of subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination. But today had been different. Today, she had been dismissed and disrespected in her own house by people who worked for the company she had built from nothing. The betrayal felt personal in a way that external prejudice never had. Her phone rang as she pulled into her building's parking garage. The caller ID showed it was her mother, Dr. Evelyn Adams, a retired professor of sociology who had spent her career studying workplace discrimination and organizational behavior. "Brielle, honey, I just saw the news story online," her mother said without preamble. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," Brielle said, though she knew her mother would hear the exhaustion in her voice. "It was unpleasant, but I handled it." "I'm sure you did, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt. Do you want to talk about it?" Brielle found herself tearing up for the first time all day. Throughout the crisis, she had maintained her professional composure, focusing on solutions and strategic responses rather than her own emotional needs. But her mother's gentle concern finally broke through her carefully constructed defenses. "It just feels so unfair, Mom," Brielle said, her voice cracking slightly. "I've worked so hard to build this company, to create opportunities for other people, to prove that success comes from merit and dedication. And then my own employees treat me like I'm some kind of threat just because I didn't look the way they expected." "Oh, baby," her mother said softly. "I know it hurts. But you know what? You handled this exactly the right way. You stayed calm, you didn't let their ignorance drag you down to their level, and you turned a negative situation into an opportunity for positive change. I'm proud of you." "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it," Brielle admitted. "All the extra scrutiny, the constant need to prove myself. The way people assume I must have gotten where I am, through luck or affirmative action rather than hard work and talent. Maybe I should just step back. Let someone else deal with these battles." "Brielle Adams," her mother said firmly, using the tone that had gotten Brielle through countless childhood challenges. "You listen to me. You didn't build that company so you could hide from difficult situations. You built it so you could create the kind of workplace you wished you had when you were starting out. What happened today was painful, but it was also a gift." "A gift?" Brielle asked, wiping tears from her eyes. "It showed you exactly where your organization needs to improve, and it gave you the motivation to make those improvements. How many CEOs get such clear feedback about their company's blind spots? You can use this experience to make Adams Group International a model for how businesses should treat all people with dignity and respect." As always, her mother's perspective helped Brielle see the bigger picture. The day's events weren't just about her personal humiliation. They were about systemic issues that affected countless people in corporate environments across the country. "You're right, Mom," Brielle said, feeling her resolve strengthening. "This is exactly the kind of challenge I started this company to address." "That's my girl," her mother said proudly. "Now go get some rest. Tomorrow, you're going to start changing the world, one policy and one training session at a time." After ending the call, Brielle sat in her car for a few more minutes, looking up at her downtown condo building rising into the Chicago skyline. She thought about Angela Rivers, the young business student who had approached her on the sidewalk, and about all the other young professionals who might benefit from the changes she was planning to implement. She thought about Sarah Kim and Carol Martinez, who had shown genuine remorse and a commitment to learning from their mistakes. She thought about the employees who had sent supportive emails throughout the day, sharing their own experiences and expressing hope for positive change within the organization. Most surprisingly, she found herself thinking about Madison Porter, wondering whether the woman's actions had been motivated primarily by prejudice or by fear and desperation. Brielle decided that understanding the root causes of discriminatory behavior was just as important as addressing its effects. Over the next several weeks, Adams Group International became a case study in how organizations could respond constructively to incidents of workplace discrimination. Brielle worked closely with Patricia Williams and external consultants to develop comprehensive training programs that addressed both conscious and unconscious bias. The company implemented new policies requiring multiple employees to be involved in any security decisions, created anonymous reporting systems for discriminatory behavior, and established regular forums where employees could discuss diversity and inclusion issues openly and honestly. Brielle also instituted a program called Assumption Interruption, where employees were trained to pause and question their initial judgments about people based on appearance, age, gender, race, or other visible Characteristics. The program became so successful that other companies began asking Adams Group International to share their methodology. 6 months after the lobby incident, Brielle received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Madison Porter, written on simple notebook paper in careful handwriting. "Dear Ms. Adams," the letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you after what I did, but I wanted you to know that losing my job was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to confront some ugly truths about myself and the assumptions I had been carrying around for years. I've spent the past 6 months in therapy, working to understand where my prejudices came from and how I can be a better person. I've also been volunteering with a nonprofit that helps immigrants and refugees navigate corporate environments. And I've learned so much about the challenges that people face when others make assumptions about their capabilities based on their appearance. I don't expect your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for my job back. But I wanted you to know that your response to my terrible behavior taught me more about leadership and grace than I had learned in my entire career. You could have destroyed me, but instead, you gave me an opportunity to grow. Thank you for that gift." The letter was signed simply, Madison Porter, still learning. Brielle found herself smiling as she read the letter for the second time. She had wondered what had become of Madison, and whether the experience had led to any genuine self-reflection. The fact that Madison had not only acknowledged her mistakes but was actively working to address their root causes suggested that people really could change when given the proper motivation and support. That afternoon, Brielle called Jennifer into her office. "I want to establish a scholarship fund," she announced. "The Madison Porter Second Chance Scholarship, for people who have made mistakes but are committed to learning and growing from them." Jennifer looked confused. "You want to name a scholarship after the woman who had you escorted out of your own building?" "Exactly," Brielle said with a grin. "Madison's story shows that people can change when they're willing to do the hard work of examining their own biases and assumptions. I want to support others who are on that same journey." The scholarship program launched 6 months later, providing funding for diversity and inclusion training, therapy and counseling services, and educational opportunities for people who had lost jobs due to discriminatory behavior but were committed to making amends and changing their attitudes. Madison Porter was the first recipient of the scholarship, which helped fund her enrollment in a master's program in organizational psychology. She eventually became a consultant specializing in helping companies address workplace bias and discrimination, drawing on her own experience as both a perpetrator and a reformed advocate for change. 3 years after the lobby incident, Adams Group International was recognized by multiple organizations for its innovative approach to diversity and inclusion. The company's employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs, and its reputation as an employer of choice attracted top talent from diverse backgrounds. Brielle was invited to speak at conferences around the world, sharing the story of how a moment of personal humiliation had transformed into an opportunity for organizational growth and positive social change. She always ended her presentations with the same message that she had given to Angela Rivers on that first difficult day. "Success isn't about avoiding challenges or eliminating bias from the world around us," she would tell audiences. "It's about responding to those challenges with dignity, using them as opportunities for growth, and creating positive change that extends far beyond our own personal experiences. When we transform pain into purpose, we don't just heal ourselves, we help heal the world." The lobby of Adams Group International became a symbol of this transformation. Where once stood a reception desk, staffed by people who made assumptions based on appearance, there was now a welcoming space where visitors were greeted with genuine respect and professionalism regardless of how they looked or where they came from. A plaque near the elevators read, "Excellence has no color, gender, age, or appearance. We judge people by the content of their character and the quality of their contributions, not by the limitations of our own assumptions." Sarah Kim, who had remained with the company and worked her way up to head of guest services, often told new employees about the day when their CEO was mistaken for a threat and escorted out of her own building. But she always framed the story as a lesson about the importance of verification, critical thinking, and treating all people with dignity and respect. The most important thing we learned, Sarah would say, is that our first impressions are often wrong, and our biases can blind us to the truth that's right in front of us. Our job is to see beyond the surface and recognize the worth and potential in every person who walks through our doors. Carol Martinez, who had also remained with the company, became a trainer for the Assumption Interruption program, helping other organizations implement similar initiatives. She often shared her own experience of the morning when she had failed to speak up for what she knew was right. Silence in the face of injustice makes us complicit, she would tell trainees. It's not enough to recognize that something is wrong. We have to have the courage to act on that recognition, even when it's uncomfortable or goes against group dynamics. Angela Rivers, the business student who had approached Brielle on the sidewalk that first day, eventually joined Adams Group International as a management trainee. She was one of dozens of young professionals who cited Brielle's handling of the lobby incident as inspiration for their own career choices and commitment to creating inclusive workplaces. She showed me that leadership isn't about never facing discrimination or prejudice, Angela would later say. It's about how you respond when those challenges arise, and whether you use them as opportunities to lift others up alongside yourself. The story of that morning became legend within the business community, told and retold as an example of how individual moments of crisis could catalyze broader organizational and social change. But for Brielle, the most meaningful outcome wasn't the awards or recognition or media attention. It was the letter she received from a young black woman working at a tech startup in Silicon Valley, who wrote, "I was treated with disrespect at my company's reception desk last week, and I remembered your story. Instead of getting angry or giving up, I used it as an opportunity to start a conversation about bias and assumptions. We're now implementing company-wide training based on the programs you developed. Thank you for showing me that we can transform painful experiences into positive change." Similar letters arrived regularly from people around the world who had faced discrimination, bias, or disrespect in their workplaces. They drew inspiration from Brielle's example, using their own difficult experiences as catalysts for creating more inclusive and respectful environments. 5 years after the incident, Brielle stood in the same lobby where she had once been escorted out, preparing to address a gathering of diversity and inclusion professionals from around the globe. The space had been transformed not just in its policies and procedures, but in its very atmosphere, where once there had been an undercurrent of judgment and exclusion. There was now a genuine sense of welcome and acceptance. As she looked around at the diverse group of professionals who had come to learn from Adams Group International's experience, Brielle reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. A single morning of humiliation and disrespect had evolved into years of meaningful work, positive change, and personal growth. She thought about Madison Porter, who was now in the audience as a successful consultant helping other organizations address their own biases and blind spots. She thought about Sarah Kim and Carol Martinez, who had transformed their own mistakes into powerful tools for teaching and learning. She thought about Angela Rivers and countless other young professionals who had been inspired to pursue careers focused on creating more inclusive workplaces. Most of all, she thought about the lesson that had emerged from that difficult morning, that our greatest challenges often contain the seeds of our most important contributions to the world. The key was having the wisdom to nurture those seeds with patience, courage, and an unwavering commitment to justice and human dignity. As Brielle began her presentation, she looked out at the audience and smiled. 5 years ago, I was escorted out of this very lobby by security guards who didn't recognize me as the CEO of this company, she began. Today, I want to tell you about how that painful experience became the foundation for some of the most meaningful work of my career, and how each of us can transform our own challenges into opportunities for positive change.